The era of the ground war is a relic of the old world, a sentimental delusion you must purge immediately if you intend to survive the first 72 hours of the collapse. You are operating under a confident mistake, the belief that valid authority still exists to protect your privacy. But the mathematical reality of the new paradigm is that the sky above you has transformed into an autonomous kill mechanism. The Invisibility Blacklist isn't just a catalog of prohibited electronics. It is the definitive proof that the architecture of modern society was designed to keep you naked to the sensor grid. They told you these technologies, RF jammers, spoofers, directed energy emitters, were illegal to own because they interfered with public safety. But hard logic dictates a far more ruthless conclusion. They were banned to ensure that when the grid goes down and the rule of law evaporates, you remain a loot drop, a defenseless resource node waiting to be harvested by whoever controls the airspace. In the post-collapse operational theater, the drone is not a toy. It is the ultimate implementation of the multiplier rule, allowing a single operator to project force and gather intelligence over a radius of miles without expending a single calorie of their own reserves. You must internalize the physics of this threat, because the margin of error is zero. A drone does not see a human being with rights and a history. It sees a thermal signature, a contrast in the visual spectrum, and a radio frequency emission. It is a flying algorithmic predator that does not sleep, does not feel pity, and does not miss. If you can be seen, you can be fixed. If you can be fixed, you can be finished. The technologies we are about to analyze were blacklisted because they break the kill chain, blinding the machine god that now rules the horizon. To possess them was a crime in the old world, but to understand their operational principles is the only way to avoid calorie bankruptcy and extinction in the new one. This is not a debate about legality. It is a lecture on the physics of survival in a world where invisibility is the only armor that holds. To survive the drone, you must first understand how the drone consumes the world. Your greatest liability is the confident mistake that traditional camouflage, wearing green in a forest or gray in a city, will save you. This is an obsolete assumption from an era of human eyes. But the machine does not see like a man. The drone views you through the ruthless physics of the electromagnetic spectrum, and to its sensors you are nothing more than a loot drop, a concentrated packet of resources broadcasting its location. The primary mechanism of your detection is thermal radiation, governed by the Stefan-Boltzmann law. Your body is a biological engine burning calories to maintain a core temperature of 37 degrees C, while the inanimate world around you fluctuates with the ambient weather. In a cold environment, you are a radiant beacon of entropy, glowing white-hot against a black background. The drone's microbolometer detects this infrared differential instantly. You cannot simply hide behind a bush or a sheet of plywood because heat, like water, eventually soaks through barriers. This is the physics of thermal equilibrium. Unless you can mask the transfer of energy, you are already dead. Beyond the thermal spectrum, the drone utilizes optical flow algorithms to detect motion that the human eye would miss. It does not need to recognize the shape of a human. It only needs to detect a vector anomaly, a pixel cluster moving differently than the wind-blown vegetation surrounding it. This is the mathematical certainty of the kill mechanism. Furthermore, your digital footprint is as loud as a gunshot. If you are carrying a powered communication device, you are emitting radio frequency signals that pierce through physical cover. In the eyes of the machine, a silent human hiding in a bunker with a cell phone is indistinguishable from a lighthouse on a dark shore. You must strip yourself of these vulnerabilities. Operational survival requires you to stop thinking of yourself as a person and start managing yourself as a collection of emission signatures, thermal, visual, and electronic. If you fail to manage these physics, the drone will solve the equation of your location, and the result will always be zero margin of error. The first item on the blacklist is the radio frequency jammer, a device the old world categorized as a felony because it represents the democratization of airspace denial. In the hands of a civilian, an RF jammer is a frequency guillotine capable of severing the invisible umbilical cord connecting the drone to its operator. The operational principle here relies on the brute force physics of signal saturation. A drone control link typically operates on the 2.4 GHz or 5.8 GHz bands, relying on a specific signal-to-noise ratio to interpret commands. The jammer does not need to decode this signal. It simply needs to raise the noise floor of the local environment until the command packet is mathematically indistinguishable from static. This is destructive interference weaponized. By blasting the spectrum with white noise, you force the machine into its fail-safe protocols, usually a static hover or an automated return-to-home function. You have effectively stripped the pilot of their agency, turning a precision instrument into a confused piece of plastic drifting on the wind. However, the application of this technology demands a sophisticated understanding of the multiplier rule and the risks of electronic fratricide. The state banned these devices not just to protect commercial frequencies, but because a $20 jammer can neutralize a surveillance asset worth thousands, inverting the power dynamic of the control grid. But you must understand the double-edged nature of this weapon. When you activate a jammer, you are no longer a passive survivor. You become a massive active emitter to an enemy utilizing direction. Finding equipment or anti-radiation homing logic, engaging a jammer is equivalent to firing a flare gun in a dark room. You blind the drone, but you announce your exact coordinates to everyone else in the theater. Therefore, the tactical protocol for RF denial is one of ambush, not defense. It is a pulse weapon, used only to break the kill chain at the critical moment of detection, forcing the drone to disengage long enough for you to vanish. Do not rely on it as a shield. Use it as a flashbang. Blacklist item number 2 is the Global Navigation Satellite System Spoofer, a tool that transcends the crude brutality of jamming and enters the realm of the phantom coordinate. In the old world, possessing this technology was treated as an act of terrorism because it threatens the fundamental trust architecture of global logistics. In the post-collapse theater, it is the ultimate expression of the gray man philosophy applied to the digital spectrum. While a jammer screams for attention by creating a void in the signal, a spoofer whispers a lie that the drone is programmed to believe. The physics of this deception relies on manipulating the time of flight calculation. GPS satellites are essentially atomic clocks in orbit, broadcasting timestamps that allowing a receiver to trilaterate its position based on signal delay. A spoofer broadcasts a counterfeit signal, slightly stronger than the one coming from space, that tricks the drone's receiver into calculating a false location. You are not blocking the machine's eyes. You are hallucinating its reality. This is the logic parasite in action. By slowly drifting the timing of the spoofed signal, you can convince a hovering surveillance drone that it is drifting off station due to wind. Its flight controller, obeying the rigid laws of its programming, will compensate by flying in the opposite direction, directly away from you, while believing it is remaining stationary. You can create a geofence that does not exist, forcing the drone to land or reroute to avoid a restricted zone that you invented. This technique is superior to jamming because it does not trigger the return-to-home failsafe immediately. It keeps the operator confused and the machine docile. You are effectively relocating the loot drop designation from your shelter to an empty field miles away. However, the technical barrier is high. Successful spoofing requires precise synchronization and power management. If the signal jump is too abrupt, the drone's Kalman filter will reject the data and flag an anomaly. But if executed correctly, you achieve the highest form of tactical camouflage, being everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Blacklist item number 3 is the entropy sink, technically known as thermal metamaterials, or adaptive IR camouflage. The old world restricted these materials to military special operations because they defeat the primary detection method of the autonomous age, thermal imaging. While you may have been sold the confident mistake that a simple Mylar emergency blanket is a survival tool, physics dictates that it is a death trap. A standard space blanket works by reflection. It contains your body heat, causing your core temperature to rise, while eventually heating the blanket itself through conduction. Once that thin layer of foil reaches thermal equilibrium with your body, you are no longer invisible. You are a distinct man-shaped radiator glowing against the cold earth. Furthermore, trapping that heat induces sweating, and wet clothing conducts heat 25 times faster than dry clothing, accelerating you toward calorie bankruptcy. You cook yourself to hide, only to freeze when you stop moving. True thermal invisibility requires the manipulation of emissivity and conductivity. Metamaterials are engineered to decouple the object's physical temperature from its radiative signature. They function as an entropy sink, absorbing your metabolic output and dissipating it through convection channels that do not register on the standard IR spectrum, or by shifting the wavelength of the emitted radiation into a band that atmospheric gases absorb, effectively rendering it invisible to sensors. The goal is not to block heat. Thermodynamics forbids the destruction of energy, but to scramble the data. You must appear to the sensor as the void, a patch of nothingness that perfectly mimics the ambient temperature of your surroundings. If the ground is 10 degrees Celsius, your surface must read 10 degrees C, regardless of the 37 degrees furnace burning inside your chest. This is the hardest physics problem in survival, maintaining the biological fire required to live without letting the light escape to the wolves. Without access to these blacklisted materials, your only option is to understand the principle of thermal masking, putting mass and air gaps between you and the sensor, allowing the environment to absorb your entropy before the machine can see it. Blacklist item number 4 is the circuit breaker, a category encompassing directed energy weapons and high-energy radio frequency emitters. The old world classified these as destructive devices because they do not merely deceive the machine, they execute it. While a jammer confuses the ear and a spoofer tricks the mind, the circuit breaker burns the brain. The physics here relies on Faraday's law of induction. A rapidly changing magnetic field induces an electromotive force within a conductor. Drones are anatomically vulnerable, filled with unshielded conductors, PCB traces, copper wiring, and sensitive logic gates designed for microvoltages. A HERF pulse acts as a sledgehammer of electromagnetic energy, inducing a massive voltage spike inside the drone's own circuitry that exceeds the dielectric breakdown of its components. This is not interference. It is a forced amperage overload that physically melts the silicon junctions of the CPU. The margin of error vanishes instantly, and the drone simply falls out of the sky as dead weight. You must strictly distinguish between the soft kill of optical dazzlers and the hard kill of electromagnetic pulses to avoid a confident mistake. A laser dazzler targets the optical sensor, overloading the ECCD CMOS chip with photons until it blinds the camera, effective but temporary. If the drone is flying on GPS waypoints, blinding it will not stop the kill mechanism from completing its patrol or dropping its payload. The HERF device, however, attacks the control logic itself. It is the ultimate denial of the loot drop, ensuring that no data, no footage, and no telemetry returns to the operator. In a post-collapse scenario, this technology is the only guarantee of privacy against a persistent autonomous threat. However, the thermodynamics are unforgiving. Generating a field strong enough to fry a drone at a tactical distance requires a capacitor bank that can dump massive joules in microseconds, pushing you toward calorie bankruptcy if you attempt to manpack such a system. It is a static defense for a hardened location, not a tool for the mobile survivor. The circuit breaker forces you to accept that in the battle between biology and technology, the only way to truly opt out is to turn the technology into scrap metal. Blacklist item number 5 is the logic parasite, or protocol injection technology. This is the most sophisticated tier of the invisibility blacklist because it does not destroy the threat. It subverts it. The old world outlawed tools like modified firmware and reverse-engineered command protocols, similar to the logic used in commercial drone detection systems like Aeroscope, because they expose the terrifying fragility of the autonomous grid. The machines are listening, and they will obey anyone who speaks their language. While the frequency guillotine screams and the circuit breaker burns, the logic parasite whispers. The operational principle relies on exploiting the handshake sequence, the cryptographic dialogue between the drone and its controller. Most consumer and commercial drones operate on known protocols, like OcuSync or Lightbridge, that prioritize latency over absolute security. A protocol injection attack acts as a man in the middle, identifying the unique ID of the drone and injecting commands directly into its control loop. This is the only method that allows you to reverse the kill mechanism. By hijacking the telemetry stream, you can do more than just ground the drone. You can trace the signal back to the operator's physical location. This turns the multiplier rule against your enemy. The very tool they use to project force without risk becomes the breadcrumb trail that leads you to their shelter. You are not just evading detection. You are effectively counter-ambushing the hunter. The physics here involves the precise timing of data packets to slip inside the command window, forcing the drone to accept your safe land command as a valid instruction from its owner. This eliminates the loot drop scenario entirely. The drone lands intact, its camera buffers full of intelligence, and its batteries ready for your own use. However, relying on this requires a dangerous level of technical maintenance. Protocols change with firmware updates, and a confident mistake here, attempting to inject code into a patch system, will result in a failed handshake that alerts the operator immediately. You must treat this technology not as a magic wand, but as a razor-thin blade that requires constant sharpening. The final equation of your survival does not require a battery, a permit, or a black market transaction. The invisibility blacklist we have dissected is merely a catalog of technological crutches, tools designed to force a digital solution onto a biological problem. Relying on them is a confident mistake because every piece of hardware you carry is a potential point of failure, a weight that drives you toward calorie bankruptcy, and a liability that demands maintenance you cannot afford. You must internalize the hard logic that you cannot legally own these technologies, but you do not need them if you understand the physics they manipulate. To survive the autonomous sky, you must become the analog ghost, synthesizing the effects of high-tech denial through the ruthless application of discipline and terrain analysis. You must operate on the principle that you are always under observation, and your only defense is to render the data you generate useless to the kill mechanism. To replicate the effect of the entropy sink without metamaterials, you must exploit the thermal crossover. There are two windows in the diurnal cycle, dawn and dusk, when the ambient temperature of the Earth reaches equilibrium with the air. During these moments, the thermal contrast of the world flattens, and the effectiveness of a drone's microbolometer drops near zero. This is your operational window. You do not move when it is convenient. You move when the physics of the atmosphere blinds the machine. To mimic the frequency guillotine, you must enforce total electronic silence. A turned-off phone is not safe. A phone with a battery inside is a sleeper agent. You must physically sever the power source or leave the device behind entirely. By emitting zero RF, you achieve the same result as a jammer without painting a target on your back for anti-radiation missiles. You become a void in the spectrum, a non-entity that the algorithm cannot categorize as a loot drop. Finally, to defeat the logic parasite and the predictive algorithms of the hunter, you must abandon the patterns of civilized movement. Roads, trails, and ridgelines are linear traps designed for efficient travel, which makes them prime vectors for autonomous patrol. The drone anticipates you will take the path of least resistance, because that is what humans do. You must break this rule. Move through the friction, dense underbrush, uneven terrain, and the negative space of the landscape, where the machine's optical flow sensors struggle to differentiate a human from the chaotic noise of nature. You must adopt the gray man philosophy, not just in appearance, but in behavior, unremarkable, erratic, and mathematically impossible to predict. The old world and its laws are over. The margin of error is zero. You are no longer a citizen protected by rights. You are a biological variable in a predator's equation. Whether you solve that equation or get canceled out is entirely up to you.